We were competing for the championship. There was nothing in any contract between Nelson and Nigel. Nothing that said Nelson got the spare car, nothing. I read the contracts very carefully. And Nelson said to me, Frank told me I would have the spare car contracted. He wasn't being unfair. He was just repeating what Frank had told him. But the problem was it wasn't written down anywhere. And Frank wasn't conscious to tell me these things. So I was running the team in a very, you get it this weekend, you get it this weekend. I was trying to be very fair to Nigel. And Nelson by this time was probably a twice world champion. And Nigel had won 2 or 3 races the season before. I think Nelson thought that Nigel would be a pushover and was probably a bit surprised to find that Nigel was bloody quick. Nelson was quick as well, mind you. But anyway, it ended up probably May, June. Frank was semi-conscious for some of the day in the London hospital. And Nelson, probably not really understanding how heavily injured Frank was, insisted on having a meeting in Frank's hospital bedroom and me going down there. And we went in there and Nelson was saying, Frank, and you had to, I think Frank was just looking up at the ceiling or whatever. And Nelson would say, Frank, you told me I'd have the spare car and this and that and whatever. And I had to sort of look above Frank and say, Frank, is this true and whatever? And Frank sort of blinked. I'm not sure he could speak at that time because he had so many tubes in his mouth. I think he blinked to say, yes, it's true, give Nelson what he wants. So from then on, Nelson had the spare car. But the problem was Nigel was doing a lot of winning. And then we got down to the last race of the year in which our 2 drivers both were in the pound seats for winning the championship. And Alain Prost was in a very small opportunity of doing so. And we'd had 1 or 2 Goodyear tire failures, but Goodyear were very, as you would be if you were a tire company, they were very, well, they must have picked up a nail or they must have done it. But it wasn't just us. There had been 5 or 6 tire failures, notably at Imola at the Tamburello corner. And we had a tire failure with Nigel.
Colossally, it's Mansell.
Yes.
One of my favourite Murray Walker quotes.
And literally, I was in a position then on the pit wall with Nigel having a tire failure and Nelson's tyres. Nelson was then either in the lead or going to be, whatever he was in the world championship position. But by the end of the race, Nelson's tyres were going to be a few laps older than Nigel's tyres had been at the time his tyre failed. So I had a difficult decision to make. So I called Nelson in and we changed tyres and he went out. And for anybody that records these things, Nelson was closing on Alain Prost at a massive rate. And I think at the end of the race meeting, missed overtaking him by 2 seconds or something like that. Another lap and he almost certainly would have got him.
How did Nelson feel about that after the race?
Nelson was brilliant. He never, ever, and I've never read anything about recriminations from Nelson in the pits. He did not give himself the license to, say to a journalist in Brazil, if Patrick hadn't called me in, I would have been the 1987 world champion. He would have been. So I'd say Nelson was absolutely stunning.